Why is this quiet, slightly weird Scandinavian brand suddenly so obsessed over by fashion insiders? Acne Studios is the rare fashion brand that turned awkwardness, weirdness, and insider taste into a massive luxury business. It was never built to be a traditional glamour brand. It didn't start in Paris or Milan, and it didn't launch with a runway show. But today, it's everywhere. You see it on celebrities, you see it on the streets of Soho and Shibuya, and you see it dominating the cultural conversation. It has grown from a tiny creative collective in Stockholm into a global powerhouse with over 80 stores worldwide and revenues crossing 2 billion Swedish Krona. And that creates a fascinating paradox. Acne became cool, precisely because it wasn't trying to be mainstream. It was the brand for people who thought traditional luxury was too loud, too obvious, too desperate for attention. But what happens when the brand that was built on being an insider secret suddenly becomes the brand that everyone wants? Can Acne Studios survive becoming bigger, more visible, and more commercial? Or will the very hype that made it a global success eventually destroy the quiet cult appeal that made it special in the first place? To understand why Acne Studios feels so different from other luxury brands, you have to look at how it started. Because it didn't start as a fashion brand at all. In 1996, Johnny Johansson, together with a small group of friends and collaborators, founded a creative collective in Stockholm. They called it Acne, originally short for Associated Computer Nerd Enterprises, before the name was later reframed as Ambition to Create Novel Expression. They weren't interested in just making clothes. They wanted to do everything. Film, music, exhibitions, publications, furniture, and graphic design. They were a group of creatives who wanted to build a multidisciplinary world, not a seasonal wardrobe. Johansson himself didn't even take the traditional fashion school route. He was a musician and a creative director who viewed clothing as just one part of a larger cultural conversation. He wanted to create a lifestyle, a specific aesthetic that touched every part of a person's creative life. But in 1997, Johansson had an idea that would accidentally change the trajectory of the collective forever. He designed 100 pairs of raw denim jeans. They were simple, unisex, and featured a very distinct, slightly awkward detail: bright red stitching. He didn't sell them. He didn't put them in a store. Instead, he gave them away to his friends, to local artists, musicians, and creatives in the Stockholm underground scene. It was the ultimate insider move. You couldn't buy the jeans. You had to know someone. You had to be part of the club. And that strategy worked perfectly. The jeans became an instant cult item. People started asking where they could get them. The red stitching became a quiet signal, a way for creative people to recognize each other on the street. The demand grew so intense that the collective realized they had accidentally created a fashion brand. The clothing arm of the collective began to overshadow the other projects, demanding more time, more resources, and more focus. But even as they started producing more clothes, they refused to act like a traditional fashion house. They didn't chase trends, and they didn't try to compete with the loud, logo-heavy luxury brands of the late 90s and early 2000s. Instead, they leaned into their Scandinavian roots, clean lines, functional design, and a sense of effortless cool. But it wasn't just minimalism. There was always something slightly off about Acne's designs. A proportion that was a little too exaggerated, a color combination that clashed just enough to be interesting, a silhouette that felt intentionally awkward. It was fashion for people who wanted to look good, but didn't want to look like they were trying too hard. It was intellectual fashion, designed for people who understood the references and appreciated the subtle subversion of traditional beauty standards. And for a long time, that was enough. But eventually, the secret got out. As Acne Studios grew, Johnny Johansson realized that if they were going to survive in the brutal world of global fashion, they couldn't just sell clothes. They had to sell an entire universe. And because they started as a multidisciplinary collective, they knew exactly how to do it. In 2005, they launched Acne Paper, a biannual art and culture journal. It wasn't a catalog for their clothes. It was a legitimate, highly respected publication that featured interviews with artists, philosophers, and cultural figures. It had elegant art direction and high production values. Acne Paper did something crucial for the brand. It gave them intellectual credibility. It proved that Acne wasn't just a clothing company, it was a cultural curator. It signaled to the world that the people behind the brand were deeply engaged with art, history, and society, not just hemlines and fabric swatches. They applied the same philosophy to their retail stores. When Acne opened a new location, they didn't just rent a space and fill it with racks of clothes. They treated the stores like art installations. They collaborated with architects to create spaces that felt more like galleries than boutiques. They embraced a very specific, slightly clinical shade of pink that became their signature color, a shade so consistent across stores worldwide that it became as recognizable as any logo. When you walked into an Acne store, you weren't just shopping, you were stepping into Johnny Johansson's brain. This world-building strategy allowed Acne to position itself in a very unique space in the market. They weren't fast fashion, but they weren't traditional heritage luxury either. They sat somewhere in the middle, offering high-quality, design-led pieces at a price point that was expensive, but not completely out of reach for a young, creative professional. They became the ultimate if you know brand. Wearing Acne signaled that you cared about design, architecture, and culture. It meant you had good taste, but you didn't need a massive logo across your chest to prove it. But as the 2010s rolled on, the fashion landscape began to shift. The quiet minimalism Acne had championed was suddenly everywhere, and so was Acne. That created a real dilemma. By the late 2000s and 10s, the brand had grown too big and too visible to still feel like a secret. They had dozens of stores around the world. Their revenues were climbing. In 2018, persistent rumors suggested Acne could be swallowed up entirely by a larger luxury conglomerate. Instead, the founders held onto control, selling minority stakes to outside investors to fund the brand's next phase of growth. Either way, the signal was the same. This was now a global luxury player, whether it wanted to admit it or not. And the clothes were changing too. The brand that was once known for its normcore-leaning minimalism started experimenting with bolder, more maximalist designs. They introduced rave-inspired collections, super baggy fits, and aggressive, chunky footwear. They were pushing the boundaries of their own aesthetic, trying to figure out how to be loud without losing their cool. This shift didn't happen overnight. Through the early 2000s, as the Y2K and rave revival was bubbling up across nightlife and streetwear, Acne was already quietly recalibrating its aesthetic for a louder era, years before it ever stepped onto the celebrity casting stage. But the real genius of Acne's modern era wasn't just the clothes, it was how they marketed them. Acne realized that traditional celebrity endorsements, paying a famous actor to smile while holding a handbag, felt cheap and inauthentic. It went against everything the brand stood for. So instead of traditional marketing, they pioneered a strategy of cultural casting. They didn't just look for the biggest celebrities, they looked for the people who were driving the cultural conversation at that exact moment. In 2023, they shocked the fashion world by casting Kylie Jenner as the face of their fall-winter denim campaign. It was a brilliant, subversive move. Kylie Jenner was the ultimate mainstream celebrity, the antithesis of Acne's quiet, indie roots. But by putting her in raw, oversized denim, covered in body paint and grease, they completely recontextualized her image. It generated massive buzz and proved that Acne wasn't afraid to play in the big leagues. It was a wink to the audience, a way of saying, we know this is unexpected and that's exactly why we're doing it. But they didn't stop there. In early 2024, Islet, a rising K-pop girl group, sat front row at Acne's Paris show before they had even officially debuted as artists. Days later, they were unveiled as the face of Acne's spring-summer campaign. It was a perfectly timed alignment with a breakout cultural phenomenon, bringing a massive, highly engaged new audience to the brand. And then, in late 2024, they delivered the ultimate cultural flex. They announced that Charli XCX, the artist who had completely dominated the year with her brat aesthetic, would be the face of their Spring-Summer 2025 campaign. They even placed the campaign at the site of the now legendary Brat Wall in Brooklyn, the mural that had defined the entire summer's pop culture conversation. It was a masterclass in cultural relevance. Acne wasn't just reacting to the culture. They were actively participating in it. They were proving that they could cast the biggest stars in the world, but do it in a way that still felt weird, edgy, and uniquely Acne. This cultural momentum translated into serious commercial success. While many luxury brands struggled in the post-pandemic economy, Acne Studios held steady. According to Fashion BI, the brand's revenue stayed above 2 billion Swedish krona in 2024, even with a slight year-on-year dip. More importantly, their net income more than doubled, pushing their profit margin past 13%, more than double where it stood the year before. They were making more money, more efficiently than ever before. They expanded their global retail network to over 80 stores across 15 countries. Their newest flagship, opened in Tokyo's Aoyama district in 2025, sums up that gallery-like approach. 3 floors wrapped in pink granite, with sculptural seating and lighting designed by longtime collaborators, sitting directly across from Prada's iconic Aoyama flagship. They also opened a permanent gallery space in Paris, blurring the line between retail and art exhibition even further. CEO Mattias Magnusson has said the brand's medium-term goal is to reach 500 million euros in turnover, up from its current 300 to 350 million. Acne Studios was no longer a scrappy creative collective from Stockholm, giving away jeans to their friends. They were a highly optimized, highly profitable luxury machine. And yet, Acne has been here before. Back in 2018, reports said the brand was working with Goldman Sachs on a possible sale, with a valuation estimated between 400 and 500 million euros. In the end, the founders kept control and sold minority stakes to outside investors instead. But the message was clear. Even the coolest insider brand in the world is, at the end of the day, an asset that someone, somewhere, is putting a price tag on. This is where the tension lies. The fashion industry is littered with the corpses of cool, indie brands that got too big, too fast. Brands that lost their soul in the pursuit of endless growth. When a brand is built on the idea of being an insider secret, what happens when everyone is suddenly on the inside? You can see the friction in the way the brand is perceived today. Longtime fans on forums like Reddit lament the shift away from the quiet minimalism of the 2000s, criticizing the new, louder, trend-driven designs. They feel like the brand they loved has sold out, trading its effortless cool for TikTok virality and celebrity hype. They miss the days when Acne felt like a secret club rather than a global corporation. But from a business perspective, Acne is doing exactly what it needs to do to survive. In a market dominated by massive conglomerates like LVMH and Kering, an independent brand like Acne has to be loud to be heard. They have to cast Charli XCX. They have to open massive flagship stores. They have to push their aesthetic forward, even if it alienates some of their older fans. They have to play the game, even if they pretend they're above it. So why is everyone suddenly obsessed with Acne Studios? Probably because Acne has shown that insider cool can be engineered at scale, and that's genuinely new in luxury. For decades, the assumption was that exclusivity and growth were opposites. The moment a brand got big, it stopped feeling special. Acne is the test case for whether that's still true or whether a brand can keep manufacturing the feeling of discovery long after the secret is out. That is also what made the 2018 sale speculation so interesting. The real prize was never just the clothes, the stores, or the campaigns. It was the playbook itself. A magazine that doubles as a credibility machine, stores designed like galleries, and a casting strategy that turns mainstream stars into secret cosigns. That formula is already being copied across the industry, and the brand that perfected it first has a head start that's hard to buy. So, maybe the real question isn't whether acne can stay weird. It's whether weird has simply become another tool in the luxury toolkit, and whether acne can stay one step ahead of everyone else now using it. What do you think? Is Acne Studios still the coolest brand in fashion, or have they gotten too big for their own good? Let me know in the comments. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next one.